Okay, everybody, let's do this. Welcome to Believers and Nonbelievers. This is episode 17. Today we are discussing belief in transition. We've got an interesting panel of three people that are going in different directions. I'm going to be starting on my left, I guess. I'll do a quick introduction, and then we'll go around and have everybody do their 5-minute intros before we get into some back and forth. On my left is Ryan Connell from the website The Holy Apostate. I love the way you describe yourself, Ryan. So this is right off your website. Beatnik theologian, rogue scholar, nomadic secular humanist monk. So he's defined his own category. So have you Googled that? Does anybody else come up?
No one else comes up. But yeah, like it is. It's always weird to hear it. Like I had a lot of fun writing that, and then I'm not used to people actually saying it out loud, and then it's like, oh, yeah. Like,
I think it's great fun.
I think it's super fun. But yeah, as far as I know, I'm the world's only nomadic secular humanist monk. Yeah,
and that apparently then is a priority opposed over rogue scholar, because you know.
I mean, rogue scholar is good too. Like it's fun. I tried to use as many Dungeons and Dragons terms as I could. Yeah, in building my own title.
Not a Rhodes scholar, a rogue scholar.
Yeah.
Okay, and to my left is Dorothy Hussen. She's a psychologist.
Actually, I'm not a psychologist. Marriage and family therapist.
America's marriage and family therapist. Okay, sorry about that. She's with the group Inland Empire Atheists and Agnostics and Freethinkers around Redlands. And I invited you because you had given a presentation to the Freethinkers of Redlands group, and you had a very interesting story, and you were very good at talking about your experiences, and we want people that have a good recall of the transition that they have gone through. So appreciate you being here. And to my right and everybody else's left is Johnathan Elliot he's joining us from New Jersey. He is an ex-atheist. He is I guess a liberal background, and has become a progressive Christian. So we've got both sides of the story. So Johnathan, I think I'm going to start with you. Give us your 5-minute story, and then we'll get into more detail as we go through.
Sure. Hi, everybody. I guess for me, I grew up a comfortable atheist because my parents. The line I've used for years and years is my dad's an Episcopalian from Boston. My mom's a nice Jewish girl from Tulsa. I was raised confused. My parents met at Yale in the early 70s. I came along in the early 80s, and my parents were big on kind of respecting their two kids' privacy as far as religion was concerned. They didn't want to push anything on us. So I kind of grew up without feeling a need or a pull. I came out when I was 17, and I was happy and well-adjusted. I'd never at any point in my late teens or early 20s ever felt less than or persecuted for the fact that I was a well-adjusted suburban New Jersey gay kid. It was just I've never felt any sort of pain or weight because of it. And where most people found church, I found theater. That was where I got a lot of the same, I guess, community and support and belief in the power of storytelling and how those stories mean something and become morals. Instead of Moses, I had Aaron Sorkin. I mean, A Few Good Men and The West Wing and The American President kind of taught me the importance of what good storytelling meant as far as trying to be a moral and upstanding and idealistic person. That's what you find in theater. And I didn't feel a need for religion at that point in my life. Then in my late 20s, I got really sick. There's more to it, but I was diagnosed very quickly with diabetes. My sugars went from being relatively under control to extremely out of control very quickly. And I just got mad. I became angrier than I've ever been in my life at anyone. And I would find that I would come home and be by myself and just sort of rage to the open air. And what I perceived as me quietly going crazy, I was told by a friend of mine in seminary, was he perceived it as prayer. And that he said, well, why don't you explore this? If what you're feeling here is a connection to something else that you feel that's wronged you, and that there's a conversation to be had, and that you believe in something, then have that conversation. So long story long, across 5 years, my then partner and I started a process of church shopping, and he'd been badly burned by the Baptist experience in the South. Not really pertinent to what's going on now, but we sort of settled into a Unitarian Universalist congregation in South Jersey, and God was never mentioned as part of the service. Moral relativism was a very big part. There was very sort of a kind of, hey, everything's all right, whatever, just be a good person. Spiritual but not religious was something that got said a lot within the community. I remember one day it was time for the hymn, and a screen comes down, and it's Kermit singing the Rainbow Connection. And I remember sort of sitting there and going, I think I'm out. I think if I want a relationship with Kermit, I can do that on my own. And then in one of those moments where, if the line is, you plan and God laughs, I started exploring a relationship with the Episcopal Church. And then 2 Sundays later, the job opening for communications director for the Diocese of New Jersey, which is one of the largest dioceses in the country, came across my desk. And I went in and I interviewed for the job with the gentleman who was the bishop-elect at that point. And I sort of word vomited out my story, and I said, I don't know what I believe. I don't know if this is for me yet. I don't know if I even believe in God, but I'm curious enough about this culture to want to know more. And he decided that was enough to make that the kind of guy who would ask the stupid questions would probably make a pretty good communications director for him. So I went in for that interview on a Friday. He asked for my references on a Saturday, called them on a Tuesday, and I started that following Friday. And that was almost 5 years ago. And that's the short and then a year into the job, I decided I wanted to get baptized and confirmed. So on October 11th, 2014, which is National Coming Out Day, and was the 13th anniversary of me coming out to my friends in 2001, I was baptized.
I'm sorry, give me again your parents' background.
My mother is culturally Jewish from Tulsa, Oklahoma, and my dad was raised Episcopalian in Boston.
Okay. And I'm going to come back to when we get to it, because you said you were in seminary.
I wasn't in seminary. One of my best friends from high school was.
Oh, okay. So, okay. Well, that makes a little more sense then.
I think I swear a little too much to go to seminary at this point.
Because it was just like, why is an atheist in seminary? So there's a little more story there.
Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah,
Seminary, then atheism.
Yeah. Okay. So let's start with that. We'll put that post down and then move around the table here. So Dorothy, give us your quick story.
My quick story. I recently transitioned from Christianity to atheism. I was a Christian for 25 years, and then for about a 7 to 8 year process, I slowly started to deconvert, and my deconversion was directly correlated to therapy for me, from healing from post-traumatic stress disorder, from childhood sexual abuse and emotional neglect, and a chaotic household. During that 7 years, it was a slow process. I eventually became more like a liberal Christian, and then the last couple of years, I was more agnostic spiritual. I would call myself spiritual, believe in source. And then in 2017, I completely deconverted and realized, oh, wow, I'm an atheist. It was quite shocking, but I did realize it in 2017. And the reason I said that it's directly correlated to therapy for me, because I found for 25 years I thought that Jesus had healed me and believed that Jesus was the only person that could heal, and I believed that. And then when I got into therapy and found out that I had post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, I realized it was a shock, and I realized, oh, then what happened? Why didn't Jesus heal me? And I had to try and make sense of that. So it was this slow process of discovering that I was basically a good person, and that I felt like I had been tricked by Christianity to believe that the shame and the anxiety that I felt, I had misidentified it as sin, as original sin. And when I went through the healing process, I realized, oh, it's not sin. So what is, it's shame that I'm feeling. And when I started to heal from the shame and the anxiety, then I started to feel so much better. And then I had to figure out, well, how does this work with original sin? And it was very confusing for quite a while, and until I finally stopped reading. Even when I would read my Bible, I would feel confused because the Bible was about obedience and following the rules. And I was learning how to trust myself and not needing so many rules to follow. I was finding myself in the process of therapy, and in finding myself and finding faith in myself and finding that I could trust myself, I didn't need Jesus anymore.
I'm curious, you said that at one point that you felt that Jesus had healed you, and then you decided that that wasn't true when you started your therapy. What was that feeling like that you were interpreting that
it wasn't?
I'm not quite sure there. Did you still feel you had an issue, a problem with the PTSD? And how was Jesus
I did. I realized
influencing you then?
I didn't go into therapy realizing that I had PTSD. I went into therapy because it was a requirement for schooling. I was going to school to become a marriage and family therapist. And it was part of the requirement of becoming a licensed therapist is I had to go in and do my own therapy. And I actually didn't think that I needed therapy. But I was very honest in my intake, and I wrote down and told about my childhood, what had happened to me, because I was answering all the questions. And I told the therapist, I don't think I have any problems. I actually thought I was pretty mature because I'd been a Christian for 25 years and I'd been studying the Bible, and I felt like I was a mature Christian and that I didn't really need therapy. But somehow she saw through all that, and she told me, I think you have PTSD. And at that point, I still resisted when she originally told me that. I did say, oh, I don't think so. How could that be? That happened so many years ago, and how can that still be affecting me?
So you weren't feeling stressors before that?
I was. Now that looking back, I was.
Yeah.
But I couldn't admit it to anybody.
Okay.
I just couldn't admit it to anybody.
We'll have to explore that a little bit. I've got a couple more questions there. By the way, as we go along here, after Ryan gives his story, as we start to interact, feel free to basically ask each other questions. I want even though we have a lot of personal stories here, I don't want essentially 20 minutes of each person talking. We're going to try to keep this conversational. So, except for the next 5 minutes, which is Ryan's the star, we'll get into that. So, Ryan, go ahead and give us your unusual story here.
Yeah, so I am the homeschooled son of a Pentecostal pastor. I was, born Christian, as a lot of us are, but had a true, what you would call like the born again experience at 14 at Bible camp, and became what we would call on fire for the Lord. Started preaching at 15. Traveled all over the world for short-term missions trips, graduated early because I was homeschooled to go to seminary. Spent 3 years at a intense vocational Bible school where I wasn't allowed to date or watch anything over a PG-rated movie or only an hour of TV a week, and fasted twice a week. Ended up memorizing over 600 Bible verses, read the Bible 5 or 6 times, became, after I graduated, so while I was in school, was a traveling pastor, went around the country speaking to high schools mostly about how drugs and sex are bad, and hey, tonight we're going to have some pizza and a rock show, and we're going to talk about our faith if you're brave enough to hear it, those kind of things. And then was a missionary in inner city Dallas, where I would spend my weekend street preaching in front of bars and punk rock clubs, as well as Marilyn Manson concerts, different things like that. Super zealous for the faith, both intellectually and emotionally. Pentecostalism is a very emotional sect of Christianity, and I was full in it, operated in what they call the prophetic gifts, where we believe that God was speaking through me to tell you a personal secret about you, or to bring you to repentance. I would touch people on the head, they would fall over. There was speaking in tongues, there was prophecy, there was dancing, those kind of things. It's funny that you mentioned depression and anxiety. That was kind of the downfall for me, because this tradition spiritualized mental illness. So if you're depressed or anxious, it's a sin problem or a faith problem. It's definitely not a mental health problem. And so I thought that God was deserting me during these times, and would just be in anguish and heartbreak seeking God. Eventually left the church. Considered myself an atheist, though I think in retrospect I always believed in God because I was really pissed at him, and I don't think you can be that angry at something you don't believe in. So spent several years as an anti-theist, really, or my friend uses the Greek word mesotheist, which is that somebody who wars with the God, and I considered myself that, but I've noticed, much like Ventura right now, it's all burned over by the forest fires, but green is starting to grow through. I've noticed in recent years a certain softening towards spirituality in general, and a particular curiosity and longing within myself to see if there's anything to this God business. And now because and we'll talk about this, but we don't need to talk about it because the church has been very damaging to a lot of people. Religion as a whole has been very damaging to a lot of people. But I have recently found myself asking the question, what if God has nothing to do with any of that, religion, and this is all just kind of us making things up, and the only thing that God is guilty of is neglect by allowing religions to form up and control people. And so but also just curious about religion in general to see if because I received a damaging expression of a particular faith doesn't necessarily mean that all expressions of that faith are damaging. So I'm now traveling the country, going to as many religious and spiritual gatherings as I can to see if there's anything of value there, and if there's any kind of truth to it. And I'm trying to be as open-minded as possible, even though I'm still pretty damn biased towards disbelief at this point. But that's my short story.
What you said you say you're starting to feel some, or have been feeling more recently, some spiritual inklings.
Yes.
How did that begin, or I'm wondering what the seed of that might be.
Yeah, I think it initially started with realizing that not all Christians are assholes.
That's a bumper sticker when you have.
Yeah, right. Yeah, at least a T-shirt. Once I realized that I had a philosophy professor who, throughout the course of the semester, didn't express his own faith, and we would have coffee all the time, and he would let me just vent about religion, and it eventually came to be that I found out that he was actually that he's a Christian, but was so patient and empathetic and understanding about and in agreement with me about the major issues that I had with Christianity, that it opened a door for me to at least to explore this a little bit. And that was several years ago. I noticed something, ironically enough, I was at an airport and I had some Chick-fil-A while waiting for a plane, and I found myself praying. Like, I just caught myself praying before the meal, and I was like, holy shit, like, what? It's the food. The Baptists have poisoned the food. But then I was like, I'm actually sincerely grateful to whatever it is that is allowing me to enjoy. Like, I'm grateful for the ability to enjoy food, and I'm grateful for the music that's in my earbuds right now, and I'm grateful to be alive, and what am I grateful to? Who am I grateful to? Is this just? Am I just grateful for the natural process of evolution that's allowing me to appreciate beauty? Maybe, but I'm grateful, and and I want to. If there's a name to that thing that I should be grateful to, then I want to find out what that name is, I guess.
Should be grateful to?
Yeah, should be, or no, just actually am. I'm
just am.
Yeah, I don't think I could say anyone should be grateful, because the world is a cold and brutal place sometimes.
What I'm hearing from both of you is, first, Dorothy, I had such a sense of kind of relief, and my anxiety about this conversation went away the minute you started talking about how, 25 years ago, I was a Christian, I'm done, we're saved, we're taken care of, that faith is as a gateway instead of a journey. I felt that way too for so long. We didn't talk about what happened in the last couple of years, and we'll get to that. I spent 2 months in the hospital last year. On my 35th birthday, I lost my left leg. It sucked. And for most of the last year, I spent pretty sure that I couldn't come back to this job because I didn't believe in God. We'll get to that later on, maybe. But the me recognizing and having that moment with myself where I'm like, okay, there are going to be points where I'm going to walk away from this and say, I'm not talking to God right now, or I don't believe. Giving myself permission to do that gave me permission to come back when I was ready too. And I have lots of friends and people in other support groups. April is Limb Loss Awareness Month, so I'm spending a lot of my time running and being in support groups with other people who are amputees like myself. And this conversation comes up a lot, in that there are people who walk away from the systems of Christianity and organized religion, and are very comfortable calling themselves atheist after coming from a faith background, and that's working for them. And if they're able to find strength and able to find what they need to get through that, God bless them. We said that without irony. It was one of those moments of recognizing what was said as soon as it fell out of my mouth. Ryan, I mean, I was sort of sitting here, just sort of hearing you hit points that talking about the evil that's been done in the name of organized religion, and specifically in Christianity, is something that I find myself wrestling with and getting pissed off about every day. I call it the troposphere of crap, and that before you get to any of the possible good points of what Christianity as an organized front and religion in America is capable of, and even on the progressive side of it, you have to wade through what happens on Fox News every day, the history of cover-ups and hypocrisies, not exclusive to, but primarily propagated, at least in modern American culture, by the Catholic Church. God hates fags and the Westboro Baptist Church, who have a PR engine that outvoices any and all of us, which is insane and gross and heinous and wrong. And the fact that in American popular culture, Christians are always, to a man, either portrayed as the villains or, worse yet, the idiots. Mm-hmm. Before anything good can happen, for someone who's raised outside the Christian faith or has come away from it, they've got to wade through those 4 amazingly potent examples of evil. They're out there, and they've got a better press agent than any part of the good side of Christianity and of what it means to actually be a disciple of Jesus Christ. Of the truth of it. There's a movement that started 3 weeks ago with a letter from 24 faith leaders called Reclaiming Jesus. The website is reclaimingjesus.org. It's got a lot of, which basically the point of this movement is that there are progressive Christian faith leaders who feel that, and they're right in this one, that Christ's name has been taken in vain and co-opted for some incredible evil in America, specifically in American politics. And the point of this movement is to take it back.
What type?
I'm really anxious to see what happens, because progressive Christianity right now is getting its ass kicked. Like, my friends don't understand how I can be a liberal, free-thinking, happy-go-lucky gay man and honestly a Christian at the same time without lying to myself every day. And while I don't have trouble reconciling those things, I know the minute I've got friends of mine who are so ready to get their dander up and argue with me to see if they can convince me otherwise based on what they perceive as two incongruous parts of myself.
What do you, when you mentioned Fox News, I wanted to separate issues of conservatism and really not discuss that, because that's not what this panel is, as opposed to issues of religion. So you say that there's damage being done of Jesus's name. What, I don't quite understand what that
well,
is.
whether or not you consider conservatism as part of the damage, you can't deny that the brand, and from a purely marketing standpoint, the brand of American Christianity is firmly intertwined in the minds of at least millennial Americans with conservative thought.
Yeah, I know there is a connection. So, but I've just, in terms of how Jesus's name, what is happening? What are you seeing that's happening that goes against Jesus's good name? Let's call it that.
I mean, I think that I think that there is a moral and scriptural. There's moral and scriptural evidence in the Bible that gun violence is a sin. I think it's one of the great sins and illnesses of our time. I think we have a moral and scriptural responsibility to push for common sense gun legislation and get these guns into a place where they're not coming into our schools and killing our kids.
So I
think that anyone who is an honest to God follower of a disciple of Jesus Christ, like that just seems to be a simple truth to me that shouldn't be subject to debate. That seems to be so clear. And while we get constantly told a lot that, like, you know, why does politics have to come into religion? I'm like, well, politics has always been a part of religion. You go back to Jesus and his anger towards the moneylenders, to what happened during the whole story of the Passion is about one man standing up to what he felt was inherently wrong in a broken system.
Yeah,
that's sort of the point of talking about Christianity in America, and that you can't undo it from politics. You can't make those two things separate houses, because it really is about how we live our lives and what happens while we're here. I don't like to think about it in terms of what happens after we die. I don't like to talk about heaven or hell or the hereafter, because I don't think this life is a test. But I do think it's about how we live our lives and the legacy we leave. And I don't think you can talk about religion without talking about politics based on that.
So it's more of to generalize, I guess, quite a bit. It's when you think of what would Jesus do, you're saying that they're really not advocating the same sort of value system that you think Jesus would have advocated.
I think that they have a version of Jesus that I don't think is in keeping with Scripture. If you're really embedded with it and you're really following it,
yeah.
The conservative imperative that co-opts Jesus starts to fall apart really quickly if you start to work your way through this story as a moral document.
So as a progressive Christian, then you're following. I'm reminded of, like, the Jefferson Bible, you know, where he Thomas Jefferson cut out the mystical stuff, and he really liked the teachings of Jesus, and that seems to be more in line with progressive society these days. So is that kind of how you see yourself practicing the religion?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you read it comes down to a couple basic points. How I see myself as a Christian is, point one, like, love each other, love your neighbors, love your enemies too. Point two, Jesus didn't stutter on that one. That's pretty clear. That love is the basis for this, and that what we're doing is out of love for each other. Point three, however, is Jesus also was totally okay with getting righteously pissed off. I feel like there's this sort of, like, I lived in Southern Virginia and in West Virginia for a while, and this was in my 20s, in my atheist days, and I was shocked at how often Jesus' name would be invoked as something that is fussy and polite. That we need to be nice to each other. Well, to quote my musical theater background, nice is different than good. That there are times when just being polite and not having that conversation and not speaking your mind is a sin in and of itself. The trick is finding a way to do that from a place of caring and loving each other, where where it's not about slings and arrows, but there is a clear moral imperative to being a follower of Jesus Christ. God calls us to live in a right way. And what I like about the Episcopal Church, and what I like about what this path I'm on, is like, there's nothing there that is incongruous with being a gay man. I mean, everything Jesus said about being a homosexual, I'll tell you right now, right here. He said, and that was it. Like it's one of those things where it doesn't come up, but it gets co-opted because it's something that scares people. Yeah. And so they turn the Bible into a weapon, which is gross and wrong.
Okay, I have a question for you, but I'm gonna spread the time over here, so we'll come back to you.
Can I say something about Jesus
that
brought it up when you were talking? Well, it came up for me anyway. I became pretty angry when I deconverted to atheism, angry against the teachings, mainly because, not so much because how it affected me, but mainly how it affected my parenting my children. And I parented my children based on the Christian values that I was taught, that children are born sinful and that without Jesus, they're going to go to hell. And I used this philosophy to parent my children, and they suffered because of it, because what I know now about what secure parenting, how to securely parent a child, is to see them, is to connect emotionally, be present with them, and not to see them as broken, full of sin and well, anyway, so I became angry about that. And then
at what point did that come up for you? So kind of trying to exploring the transitional periods here.
Yeah, it was during that therapy period when I started to learn how to love and accept myself. And then I understood that that's how we raise our children to become securely attached to themselves, is we have to accept them and love them unconditionally. And I thought that I was loving them. I was experiencing unconditional love in through Jesus, but through therapy, I don't know exactly the moment, but through that process, I realized that, I was experiencing conditional love, and it's conditioned upon obedience, which is how I was parenting my children. And later on, I thought, what was I thinking? I took all my parenting advice from a man, Jesus, who was never married and never had children. And yet all my parenting advice came from following him. That was my goal always, just to be more like Jesus. I wanted my kids to be more like Jesus. But Jesus was never married. He never had children. And yet the church somehow taught, or I believe, that all the teachings on marriage and parenting was directly from God, directly from Jesus.
So you felt this was an ideal that was really not appropriate, or it was kind of a false ideal?
The Bible says much about healthy marriages or healthy relationships. Period. I don't think so. Not anymore, anyway.
Any comment on that? Anybody?
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. And I mean, I think this is one of the ways that the church damages people in the non-political sense is the concept like of shame, just especially with the original sin doctrine, the idea that you're even after you're a Christian, like Christians never feel like they're good enough. They always feel like they're messing up. Like every Christian I talk to is just like, oh, like I used to be way more legalistic, but like they're just, it's always this pressure to be perfect or even to perfectly accept grace or whatever. So there's this shame, this feeling of not measuring up. I think also like issues of like domestic violence and marital rape are higher in the church because of that model of both forgiving constantly, always, also as well as like the husband being the head of the household. So like there's the biblical concept of marriage and family. And well, I don't want to say biblical because the modern interpretation of the Bible in regards to marriage and family tends to allow for pretending to be perfect all the time on Sunday mornings and allowing a lot of agony, strife, and abuse to go on much longer than they should because God wants you to submit and because I'm supposed to forgive him all the time. Those are some big issues.
But staying into this transition concept, when did these kind of ideas start to expose themselves to you?
I started having trouble when I was about 20, which is my last year of Bible school. So my depression and anxiety was pretty big. People were just telling me to pray more about it. And around that time that I started talking to some Wiccans and atheists when I was street preaching, and they would always love to come up and talk, and always love to ask particular intellectual questions about the historical reliability of the Bible. When I found out that Matthew didn't write Matthew, my mind was blown. That this is actually this holy God dictated Bible is actually had a lot of hands on it, and a lot of it's been like this game of telephone over 2,000 years.
Who do you say I am?
Huh?
Who do you say I am? Matthew 16.
Is this I don't know the I know the verse. Is that something that was added later or?
Well, no, it's what Jesus says. Who do you say I am? And I think that's part of the ongoing conversation here is that while God may be the idea of God as even infallible is one of those things that I have trouble with. I was writing on this for a sermon last year, and the idea of what happens between the Old Testament and the New Testament is, did God discover Xanax? Do we know what happened there? Because there is a very clear change in temperament between those two books. And if you view those stories, and there's a former Orthodox Jew who's a really wickedly funny writer named Shalom Auslander, who wrote two books, Foreskin's Lament and Beware of God. And he talks about his Orthodox upbringing and his experience in the yeshiva and how he came out of that just with this rage against God, the Old Testament incarnation of God. And he has one bit in there, and I'm totally misquoting it here, but he basically says that if you took the entirety of the Old Testament and put it in Microsoft Word, and you did find and replaced God with the word Fred, and then read it aloud, you'd be like, this guy Fred is a screwed up person. He's mean, he's nasty, he's jealous, he's spiteful. No one would want to be around Fred. And I think that that's kind of true when you look at a lot of the lessons in the Old Testament, that the Old Testament's God is, and again, I'm 3 years into my relationship with Christ as a baptized Christian here, but I'm calling it as I see it, that you have a God of lessons and rage who treats Christianity and a relationship with God as a test for the entirety of the Old Testament. And then the New Testament, the Gospels there, are about God's Son hanging out with prostitutes and healing people who are sick beyond hope, and about calling truth to power. That something really vital happens at some point in the story that creates a turnaround. And that's how my relationship with Jesus Christ is working right now. Dorothy, I'm hearing you too with a lot of what you said about the infallibility. And I had a lot of that. I had a really negative, in my first year in this, I had a really negative experience coming to the church initially. And I knew that while this could be my job, it couldn't be my faith, was my initial assessment. And I ended up having a really long series of talks with a staff member at the Diocese of New Jersey, who's he's a priest that came to us from Oakland, California. That relationship in a lot of ways has really saved me. And his point about it was that whatever we consider infallible in the Bible, the people who pick that book up become an institution and create a whole slew of problems. And I'm constantly, as someone who works for the church and also believes, I'm constantly trying to assess where God is in conversations versus where the errors of people in interpretation and where the angers and misjudgments and interpretations that cause some really awful stuff to happens. I mean, that's where I'm constantly trying to latch in and say, okay, where is God in this, and where are people acting in the name of God in a way that creates fallibility? I'm also really glad that you mentioned the word shame. I'm personally trying to find a way to keep shame out of my relationship with God, because I don't believe that shame has any place in a real religious experience. Shame shuts you down. You can't act on it. You can't create anything good out of shame. Guilt, you can do things based on guilt, but you can't. Shame destroys you. And I feel for you on that one, just because that's something I'm still constantly working out, like where shame is in this relationship and how not to make it part of what I'm trying to move forward on.
Johnathan, if you can you scoot yourself left about 2 inches? The other way.
Your left or my left?
Your left. There you go.
There?
Yeah, you're there. I just want to kind of keep you there, centered. The question I had for you from what you started with before was, why did you go to as a progressive? Why did you go to religion as opposed to humanism? What was in religion that wasn't in humanism?
That's a good question.
I want to believe that there's more to this experience than just what's created based on us. And some of this is a difficult thing to explain. And if I'm just going at it from a place of logic, I tend to be a pretty logical guy in some ways. Mm-hmm. I'll defeat myself. I reached a point where I felt a call. Mm-hmm. I mean, I know it frustrates me even saying that, but I reached a point where I said, okay, there are these weird, they're God moments. There are things that just, we can call them coincidences, but there's too much that happens in my life that sort of points to that there being some sort of higher power and energy that if it's not looking out for us, it is definitely wanting something good for us and from us.
Were these feelings that came to you more as an adult, or have you sort of had bits and pieces of this throughout life?
It took me, honestly, I had a really good, easy life for like the first 30 years or so. It took some really bad crap happening for me to start really investigating this. It took me getting sick and starting insulin and changing my lifestyle there. It took the horrible experience of losing my left leg to a MRSA infection.
Yeah.
I'm also a little over 1,100 days sober.
Good.
About 3 years ago, I started recovery for that. And those have been moments where I don't think God drove me to those, but I've figured out some of the conversations I've had with people and in some ways with God based on the pain and just shit that was happening in my life.
Yeah.
I mean, redoubled things and made me stronger. Like losing your left leg on your birthday is probably the worst gift you could get. Probably.
Yeah.
This year for my birthday, my friends gave me a cake that was shaped like a foot with pull-apart toes. Yeah. And they were cupcakes.
Yeah.
They're laughing about it. I'm not yet.
And I know
but the point of it is, by virtue of that experience, it took me 6 months to get the prosthetic. I'm still walking with a cane. I'm just learning to rewalk without one. I get the second level prosthetic in the next couple of days. By virtue of that happening to me, through the chaplain at at UPenn, where they did the surgery and where I was for a couple months, I met a whole bunch of other faith communities and other people who are amputees who have faith experiences and some who don't. But my relationship with God has made these conversations a lot easier to have.
I'm curious, just because sometimes trauma drives people to God and sometimes it drives them away.
Sure.
Do you have any sense from the people that you've interacted with in these support groups, which way it tends to go on average?
Well, some of that I kind of root back to AA, and I'm comfortable saying that, we're only as sick as the secrets we keep. I made a choice at some point that, when you can't hide a missing leg. I spent a lot of my 20s sort of hiding illness and hiding fears.
Yeah.
And the fact that this happened to me, I was like, well, people are going to see an empty pant leg. Like, this is just part of my story. And it is a loud proclamatory visual that's just part of who I am.
Yeah.
And if we're going with that and I'm only as sick as the secrets I keep, then what happens when I preach or I try to lead or I try to teach from my wounds instead? What if I say, like, if I'm so worried about like being defined not as a playwright or as a teacher or as a communicator, but as an amputee teacher or playwright or communicator, what happens when that becomes the adjective that defines my life? If I take a deep breath and say that, okay, I don't want to say this happens for a reason, because I think that when people talk about God in that way, I'm like, I get really angry because, I don't think God did this to me. I don't think God gives little kids cancer. I don't think that's part of the conversation. I think we do that. We create sin. We create the awful things that happen in our lives, or it happens by virtue of just the awfulness of happenstance. But I do believe God is alongside us in suffering. He's not creating it, but he's there for us.
Okay.
And he's listening. And in anything we can survive, he's there and he's waiting with a lesson. Anything terrible that's going to happen to me, there's going to be a moment where I'm going to be able to grow and teach. And like me choosing to redouble on my faith and come back and say, okay, I'm going to talk about what happened to me. And I'm going to not curl into a little ball and take all my oxycodone and watch 400 episodes of Law and Order SVU and just hide from the world. Like, that happened because I made a choice that was rooted in my faith.
Yeah.
I wanted to get out there, and like my interpretation of trying to be more Christ-like was saying, all right, this happened. This is my wound. This is my fallibility. Time to shout it to the rafters.
Okay. Interesting. Dorothy, I'm going to come back to you for a second, because something occurred to me when you were describing your story. I sometimes I try to think of what other people would say in terms of how they would criticize a story or whatever, and I'm a little bit struck by the idea that you had most of your conversion after the therapy. So do you think that there is any element of the suggestion from a therapist that may have triggered the transition? I mean, you know about this stuff from the field in general, where they have where therapists sometimes have put suggestions.
I saw several different therapists personally, and my therapist actually is a Christian. The main therapist that I used is a Christian, not an atheist. It was a challenge to become trained in this special mind-body therapy for trauma. It's specifically created for trauma. Very different from talk therapy. So a lot of meditation, deep breathing, getting connected to your body.
What's talk therapy?
Talk therapy,
Okay.
where you talk about your problems.
Okay.
So I was quite scared to learn it in the beginning, because I didn't want to let Satan into my mind, and I didn't want to, be drawn down this wrong path from, away from God.
So was she seeing symptoms that you weren't seeing, or were you aware of those symptoms but not interpreting them correctly?
Both.
Okay.
Both. When she told me that, I think you have PTSD, this is just the first therapist that I saw. There was something deep down inside me that knew that she was right. Even though I didn't admit it at that time, it was the first time that I felt validated that what happened to me was real, and that I felt it validated when she said that to me. So even though I didn't outwardly agree with her, I kept coming back because she validated what I was feeling deep down inside.
And that was the start of realizing that it wasn't your fault in terms of whatever went wrong. You had said before that you had been told it was your sin.
Yes, it was
not
my
other,
sin.
other people's actions that were causing this.
And on some level, I knew while I was a child, it wasn't my fault, but inside I believed it was my fault, because that's what children do. We believe kids believe it's their fault.
So then, what was so if it wasn't your fault, what necessitated taking that to the level that God doesn't exist? I mean, that's a whole different jump. I'm jumping ahead a bit here, I guess, but you know.
Well, that was one of the steps. Realizing that I was, when I actually got to know myself, that I was a good person. So why would Jesus have to die for my sins? So it brought up the whole question about original sin. And I actually had some conversations with my pastor's wife and some other women in the church about this, what I was feeling, that when I read the Bible, I feel like I'm beating myself up all the time. And I knew at that point, I knew that I didn't want to do that anymore, that wasn't healthy for me. And she's the one that brought it up. She said, well, you're questioning the cross, Dorothy. And I was like, well, yeah, I guess I am. I guess you're right. And I still tried to fit it into my beliefs. I still tried to, remain a Christian, because I said, well, if Jesus died for my sins, then he died for them, and I don't have to keep asking for forgiveness every day. Then it's done. But that didn't last too long.
Why? What? You can also tell me to move on. That was enough. I can do that too.
I guess it just took time for me to let go of my belief in Jesus and his death on the cross, because I was leaving my whole community. It was my whole identity. It was everything to me. I was a Christian, and that's all I knew. And that was the last time I spoke to my pastor's wife, that I didn't belong in the church anymore. If I couldn't believe in original sin and Jesus' death on the cross, then I didn't belong anymore. And then where did that leave me?
Okay. Yeah, input?
Well, that's hard, right? Like, that's just,
Yeah.
I mean, there's the concept, we talked about this a little bit before the panel, God does not exist in a vacuum. Faith or lack of faith is not just a compartment of our lives, right? Especially like a belief in God, especially if it's an ingrained, deep belief in God, is going to inform your politics, your morality, your sexuality, your concept of self, your sense of purpose and destiny in the world. And that it's hard to let go of everything that you are. And it's hard to go through that. I mean, I think that, and Kierkegaard, the philosopher Kierkegaard, talks about this a little bit too, but the heart typically precedes the brain, in the sense that we are feeling things that we can't put thoughts or words to yet. Where, as I'm reading the Bible, I feel like I'm getting beat up. Is this sense of emotionally, I am at this place where this is not feeling true, but intellectually or logically, or even just consciously, I can't get to that point, because so much is structured on this belief, and I'm not going to allow in transition, or at least me in transition, tried really hard to fit reality as I saw it into the God box, and tried to make it all work because I wanted to hold on to these things. And I think even like for believers and non-believers, we need to. It is beneficial if we can let go of our preconceived notions as to who and what God is, so that we can grow into something new, right? As opposed to like clinging to past self. But like it's a really
That's
hard
a good
thing to
description.
do.
I like the way you described that.
Ryan, you had my heart the minute you mentioned Kierkegaard. When I was Kierkegaard taught me a lot about worship and the purpose of worship, and I feel like I went through a lot of like, well, what do I like out of a church service? Like, there are certain things that really freak me out. Like, I'm not such a fan of praise bands or what's considered modern Christian music, although there's a lot of secular music that is Christian music too. But Kierkegaard kind of leads from the idea that, because he was a theater nerd, first and foremost, he leads with the idea that the best works of worship are just theater, except we've got who the audience is wrong. The audience is not the people in the pews. The audience is God. We are all performing our worship for God. And like that was one of the, because I like Kierkegaard, I like how he writes, I like how he talks about the struggle of religion. He's my homeboy. I'm a fan. Do you guys know who John Spong is? He's a retired Episcopal bishop who he gained a lot of notoriety in a really great interview that came out mid-2016 that talked about the myth of hell. And this coming from a retired Episcopal bishop, kind of like all the right and all the wrong people clasp their pearls and clutch their pearls based on what he was saying. Because he talked about the idea that hell was created, and by extension, the ideas of original sin, to keep people in line, to turn the Bible into a stick instead of a carrot. And I think that's one of the absolute worst things you can do with faith.
Yeah.
When you turn your relationship into God, when you turn your relationship with God into something that is based in fear. I mean, have we ever had a relationship based in fear with anyone in our lives that ends successfully? I haven't. They all go away, or they all end up incredibly fraught when that's the one thing that you come back to. I refuse to believe this life is a test. And that comes from Spong, that comes from a lot of the teachers I've gotten. And Ryan, I'm with you completely that. And that's kind of how I'm leading my life. Like the difference here is that I came to faith and came to Christianity a lot later in life than the two of you did, which is absolutely going to color things a little bit. And that's a different conversation to be had. But it's the priest who baptized me, Mother Amy Cornell in Mercerville, New Jersey. She has this uncanny ability to really make faith relationships authentic in all elements of life. Once a year, I'm not sure she did it last year, but she did the last couple. She does a Dr. Eucharist, where we do a full-on Eucharist that is based around the idea of faith in relation to Doctor Who, because she is a gigantic nerd, same as I am. But she's able to do this in a really authentic and beautiful way that talks about something, because we have a lot of sci-fi kids younger kids in our parish who are 16, 17. Well, we did at that point, we still do, but that we had a lot of really interesting young sci-fi geeks who loved the idea of seeing this thing that seems so out there and present in popular culture that has a really deep and beautiful relationship with faith. And what we did was we had a Eucharist, we had communion together, and then we all sat down for a Doctor Who inspired meal and watched an episode of the show Blink from the David Tennant years. And we talked about, well, where is God in this episode?
I have to watch that now.
It's a good episode. I can vouch.
And it is. It's the Weeping Angels episode, and I am betraying my geekery fiercely in this. But you can have a really interesting conversation about where is God in this? Who are the monsters? What's actually happening here? Because on the surface, it's just like there's these stone angels that are attacking people, and all this crap is happening. But there's some really interesting thoughts about, well, what is predestination? Where do we end up? Where are we sent to end up? Where's our choice in all of this? And it just watching that moment where I could see our young people's minds, like where the first idea of like them making the connection and seeing their minds blow was like, I wanted to do a cartwheel. That was an amazing moment. And then the second moment was when they got it and then they took over the conversation and they were leading us. That's the point of all this. I get so freaked out when Christianity is treated like something that we have to fool people into being a part of, like it's the pill you hide in the mashed potatoes for your kid or your dog. Like, surprise, Jesus! That's not how this relationship works. You have to engage in it. You have to know what you're getting into, and you have to understand the promise you're making to yourself.
Yeah, I mean, to add to that, so I think one of the reasons that I like the designation secular humanist and use it as a spiritual designation is because I believe that the entire human experience and the entire human tradition is of value to us spiritually and morally and socially, and one can learn just as much about the cosmos and about the human condition and about how we are to relate to each other from Harry Potter and Doctor Who as you can Shakespeare or the Bible. And so I am, folding the Bible into this mess of like people writing and wrestling with the human experience, and see that I can learn and glean spiritual truth from it, from all of it. Roller derby and monster truck shows, and especially like Firefly is church for me in a lot of ways, because they wrestle with questions of faith in a way that's way more honest than God's Not Dead, because God's Not Dead has this prescribed, this is right, here are the rules of how to be a human, and you must follow these. And like art itself, especially sci-fi, is a really good way of asking these open-ended questions. And I think that there's a lot of value in having that and not discounting something because it's designed for kids or designed as entertainment. But like everything that humans do is part of this wrestling with what the world is and what reality is and what God is. And I just find it really beautiful. And when I'm in New Jersey, I would love to go to a Doctor Who Eucharist.
We usually do it around October.
All right.
Mother Amy is I had the pick of any of our 144 congregations. We have 44,000 Episcopalians and 144 congregations that I'm communications director of. And I had my pick of any of them to take a newcomer's course. And she was just my kind of weird. And the great thing about Episcopal priests is it's kind of like Clark Kent going into the phone booth and coming out Superman. Because we have a very diverse body of priests, and they tend to come to the priesthood as a second or sometimes third career, you really see who they were before as part of their ministry. And Mother Amy used to work in corporate management for Barnes & Noble. And you can totally see that she's an epic book nerd, and that she understands personnel management. And that is just such part of our ministry. My bishop, Chip Stokes, was a bartender in New York City in the 80s. And you can kind of see like how that leaks into his ministry 30 years later as he was a priest in Florida and then Bishop of New Jersey now. But that's the idea that our priests are beautiful, wonderful people who are also incredibly fallible and often wrong and deeply human is really, the point of our creed is we don't say if we fall into sin, it's when we fall into sin. Like we're all going to screw this up. And I think that's the first step we have to take is like, okay, we are going to try our best to live by this book, and we are going to screw it up at the end of this sentence, and then again at the end of the next one, at the end of the next one. But you fall down 8 times, you get up 9. And I think that's really a core of this for me. And Ryan, I hear you that we're going to have a Firefly conversation at some point. That's next.
He's got a little
particularly the last episode of the series.
Got a little schedule flexibility, so maybe you guys can make this happen.
We'll hang out.
Let me throw out a question for everybody, because this really does apply to everybody. As you were shifting positions, at what point, or tell me about the transition from having these ideas in your head to letting other people know that you were possibly changing positions. Let's start with Ryan.
Yeah, the first few conversations I had did not go well, which is probably not surprising. I mean, at first it took a long time to even have the language to articulate what it was I was going through. Again, Pentecostalism is a very unique form of Christianity, which believes in the active presence and working of demons. And so at first I was like, I'm really struggling with the demon of doubt. Like, I feel like I'm being attacked by the demon of doubt and depression and sadness and confusion. And everyone's like, wow. I did not have the language to say, I don't think that the Bible's true, for a long time. So I just kept going to different churches, like more severe churches, thinking that would be the thing that would fix it. And was at this house church helped start a house church in Colorado Springs, where I just kind of stopped talking because I was really questioning everything emotionally and logically about faith. And, after a long period of time of me not talking, somebody said, we haven't heard anything from Ryan in a while. And so I just unloaded in this very tearful, angry, like, here are all my questions about the Bible, here are all my questions about the goodness of God, here are all my questions about how the church is representing God. I don't think that any of this is true. And like, I was just, heaving and like, I don't think that I believe in God anymore at all. And everyone was just really silent for a few minutes. And then somebody was like, have you tried praying about it? And I was like, yeah.
Response, yeah.
Yeah. I'd like to lay hands on you right now. So I think that was the first time. The conversation with my parents was obviously hard. They're in full-time ministry. I hid it from them for a long time. I was probably out as an atheist to everyone but them for probably 2 or 3 years before they kind of cornered me, because you don't just go from full-time ministry to working at Starbucks for no reason. But I thought that I got away with it. That was hard for them because, like, Christian parents want their kids to grow up Christian, and like if they see it as a personal failure when their kids aren't, right? And so that was a really hard conversation to have. But after that, it just became progressively more easy, especially when somebody was trying to win me to the faith. I was very happy to tell them that I wasn't, and why, like, let me see your Bible real quick. But those first conversations were really, really hard.
Dorothy?
Yeah, I was fortunate. I talked mostly to my husband, Jim. We were both going through the marriage and family therapist schooling at Cal Baptist. And so a lot of our conversations for me helped. It focused on human development and our brains and the neuroscience behind relationships, connection, and understanding emotions, the science behind what's going on, in our brains. And that helped me a lot in just talking to him about that. And so my thinking started to change from sin, like, I sin every day, to, I just make mistakes every day, because that's a human experience. That's how we learn. We have to make mistakes in order to grow and learn. And that's how resilience is. So I started to shift my thinking and vocabulary from spiritual terms like forgiveness and sin, and to, we make mistakes, and to more of a vocabulary around psychology and human development and neuroscience.
What about taking it beyond that to the friends, coworkers, more and more to public? Did that happen? Or at what point did that happen?
It was hard. It was hard for me. I mentioned earlier that I did have those conversations with a few friends that I had in the church, but they didn't quite understand. They just never contacted me. Nobody asked me why or what's going on, what happened. I just stopped going to church, and they never contacted me again. Then on Facebook, I did an interview for Women Beyond Belief. It's a podcast. And I told my whole story on there, and then I posted that on Facebook. And I assume that, the Christian friends and family saw it and watched it. I never told my mom, because my mom lived with us the last 5 years of her life. And she told me that she could die in peace because all her kids are Christians. So I couldn't tell her. Like you said, when you're a Christian parent and your kid doesn't become a Christian, it's seen as a personal failure. Like, you are responsible for raising your kids in the faith so that they don't go to hell. And I always took that as a personal failure, because my son he was never a believer, and both our kids rebelled, and that's another story. But I get along real well with my son and my daughter now, because I can accept myself. If I can accept myself, I can accept others, and so I get along really well with them now.
That sounds like it really be an interesting topic to talk about. When or if you should tell your older parents something that upsets them like that. People have different opinions.
Yeah.
Johnathan, how about you? How did your change of heart come to being exposed to friends, family, public, and how did it go?
It was some of the most difficult conversations I've ever had in my adult life. I think that I sort of took for granted that I never really had a traumatic coming out experience in my teens, coming out as a gay man. And my friends and I laugh about this now, but when I came out as a Christian in late fall of 2014, it really did mirror a gay coming out process. Like, I had a couple of friends who said verbatim, like, have you tried not being a Christian? And like, I was just like, where this verbiage is going? Like, what's happening here? My very best friend, she and I grew up together. We did shows together. I thought that she and I were going to be inseparable. I lost her to this. At some point in my life, I may get her back, but
That's tough.
she still just doesn't get it.
Yeah, that's tough.
And it became one of those things where we would hang out, and she would still try and, like, we had a conversation where she actively threw at me, and we're both survivors of pretty rough diseases in our 20s. If God is so great, why did God give us these sicknesses? Why does God give kids cancer? Like, that actually became a verbatim conversation we had one night at her favorite diner. And I was pretty sure, I'm like, I don't see how this relationship is going to be able to last at this point. And I knew leaving the diner that was going to be the last time we saw each other. And when I got sick and lost the leg, she didn't make contact. Our mothers are best friends, so we sort of hear what's going on with each other through there. But the relationship, whether or not it fractured based on distance or erosion, this change in me is what started that process. I have a lot of other friends who just don't get it, and or when I will engage with someone in conversation at a party or something like that, or when we're talking about something that is totally secular. I have a friend of mine who's a very successful monologuist on and off Broadway. He's worked and around the country, and we got into a really hot and heavy argument online, and he was very comfortable calling me a Jesus freak. Like, it's opened up the ability for people to treat this as a wound and as a stick they can hit me with. And that doesn't really bother me, because at the end of the day, this is about my relationship with God. You can't hurt me based on yelling at me about it.
Yeah.
And I understand that. That doesn't mean it doesn't hurt in the moment. The real telling coming out process was when The Guardian published that piece on me in July of 2015 and had 1 million people read it around the world that day. And that was the day that the Episcopal Church announced that it was adopting same-sex marriage rights worldwide. So the Episcopal Church was in the news anyways. So that got a signal boost. And there's 500 comments on that thread. The first 50 of which are about how I'm too Christian to be gay. The next 100 of which are about how I'm too gay to be Christian. And then the Nigerians showed up and called for my head. So it was just sort of like this, I'm going to be living in this middle of the road area for a while, trying to figure this out.
Yeah.
I mean, the good news is in my immediate, I don't have to, based on how my faith works, and based on how my denomination of Christianity works, and how the people I see in the pews and the people I see in the pulpit every Sunday, my experience with human sexuality isn't a sin. The things that the moments I fall into sin are, when I say nasty things to my friend, or I get angry about what's happened to me, or the mess I leave in the bathroom, or the fact that I don't do the dishes. These things, the normal things, are considered the things I need to correct and need to try to be better at. But the issue of human sexuality, I mean, I've come to a point where I don't need to work on reconciling those.
So do you dismiss those parts of the Old Testament that say homosexuality is abomination? I mean, how do you, for lack of a better word, buffer that?
On Maundy Thursday that use the old children's books, Choose Your Own Adventure. The ones where you make a choice and you go to page 17 and you read what happens there, and you make another choice and you go to page 342.
Yeah.
If you try and live the Old Testament literally, it is going to be very, very difficult for you to be able to get from day one to day two in modern America. I don't know anyone who can do it. Especially, there's do you guys know who Rachel Held Evans is?
Yeah, I do.
She's a former evangelical who wrote a book about a woman's year of living biblically, and she's a very strongly voiced, very kind woman who is a progressive Christian and very strong third wave feminist. There's so much in the Bible that has to be taken as metaphor, and has to be taken as a document of why it was created and why it was said in the moment and in the time it was said. Like we were talking about before filming, Leviticus becomes a real rough ride when you think about how much I enjoy shrimp, or the fact that I'm sitting here in a wool shirt and a polyester bow tie. There's a lot of other reasons I could be stoned to death beyond the fact that I occasionally like to kiss another dude.
Yeah. Except people don't take that as seriously, but fair enough.
Yeah, but that's a knock on them. That's them being a choosy Christian, and choosing to put blinders on about certain things and accentuate things that shouldn't be accentuated.
Yeah,
that's not on me, and that's not on God.
I've asked everybody to sort of have questions for each other as we're kind of winding down. I don't want to miss that opportunity. So does anybody here have a question for anybody else on the panel before I throw off whatever I have left here?
I have one for Dorothy.
Go for it.
So I'm trying to find a way to say this that says what I'm trying to mean. And if I stumble on my words or say something that makes me sound a little bit like a jerk, that's not the spirit of what I'm trying to say here. I know a lot of people who went through a faith experience like yours, where they wrestled with it and they felt sin and anger and shame and untoward pressure from the systems of the institution of religion around them. And what scares me about some of that is what makes me really grateful for your story is that through your learning experience and through your therapy, you were able to have a vent for that and to be able to say, this community and this experience is broken and dysfunctional. Here's a place where I can talk about that experience and I can process that experience and arrive on the other side healthy.
Mm-hmm.
I know so many people who are burned badly by their church experience, not necessarily their God experience, by their church experience. And they just say, well, I'm an atheist. And then they walk out the door, salt the earth behind them, and never look back and never really deal with those emotions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
To engage with another community or be able to grow and to heal. I guess my question is, how do you how do you recommend reaching people like that? Because I don't have a problem with someone saying they're an atheist or choosing to leave behind a broken institution. My hope is that they're just finding a way to get healthy again. And I know a lot of people, and my former partner is one of them, that he just walked away from the church and he is still such a raging ball of anger about it.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's what I do as a mind-body psychotherapist. I just help people heal from the traumas of childhood and help them to love and accept themselves. And I think that's the key. I mean, you talked a lot about love and the relationship with God that you have, and I do believe that love is the answer. That, however, I don't believe that we need it from an outside source. I think the answer is to love ourselves first and love and accept ourselves, and that that gives us that security within. Then that provides the foundation for relationships with others, and but it all starts with that relationship with ourselves, and that's all I try and do is in my therapy and trying to get out the word to people that you can heal, that we can change our brains, that emotions are there for a reason. They cause a problem if they get stuck, and that's what trauma does. Trauma is the stuck terror within you of that situation that happened. And if we can get those emotions unstuck through therapy, then you're freer to live the life in the present and be present and enjoy life. And sounds like, you might know friends that they're stuck in that anger because of what happened to them. And, we can only do what we can do, I just try and get that word out that we can change, we can heal, we can change our brains. And, it's called mindfulness, the practice of mindfulness.
Did you see the movie A Wrinkle in Time?
No, I haven't seen it yet.
Not yet.
Well, you've seen the advertising for it out there, right? Madeleine L'Engle, who wrote it, is a famous Episcopalian and had a lot of really strong Christian undercurrents to a lot of her work. And in seeing the movie, I was like, okay, this is the part where they're going to talk about Jesus. Okay, we're getting there. And the interesting thing about the movie is it really does replace the idea of Jesus and the idea of Christian thought that you'd find like in kind of a C.S. Lewis-y kind of way with Oprah. And the concept of like first Oprah, like, okay, Oprah's Jesus now, okay. But then it really goes back to a place of self-determination and self-love as being the thing you have to do first. And I'm like, yeah, Madeleine L'Engle was talking about this. She was using Jesus as coded language for that because she couldn't say it yet. But I thought that was one of the most interesting things about the movie is that self-assurance and self-love really do replace the language of Christianity that was originally in the story.
We're running down toward the end here. I'm going to put out one more question, but we're going to let's do this in about 10 minutes, and then we'll take a quick break and do some Q&A. And this is for everybody, so whoever wants to chime up first, feel free. What do you think is missing from your current belief system that you really enjoyed or liked from your previous one? Is there anything that you kind of miss that is now essentially inaccessible to you in this current belief system?
Yeah, I'll go. I think I'm going to say community, and for lack of a better word, destiny. I think that especially now where I find myself in between Christianity and atheism and trying to figure it out, like I feel it would be great to have a small group or a church that I could go to and have people that I meet with regularly to open my heart to and have those conversations. And that just comes built in to the church. I think it's the strongest, most favorable aspect is there are people here that believe what you believe, and you don't have to explain yourself. You can just go into being you. At least in the ideal sense, not every church offers that full authenticity, but community as a whole, like I think it's harder to find as a non-believer, and it's definitely hard to find as a nomadic mystic. There's not as many of us as you would think, but also the sense of destiny that everything that happens is happening because God wants it to happen, and there's a lesson to be learned here, and so it buffers any negative experience. There's a reason for this, and God is in control ultimately. Now there's no one's driving this ball of dirt and water through space, and so like there is no control, and like I don't know if I'm going to end up all right, and that's hard to rectify sometimes. And so I miss those two things, though I think I still choose the pursuit of honest, authentic truth over those comforts, if I had to choose.
Interesting. Well, I mean, you'll see once you start to become less nomadic. I mean, you know this stuff.
Yeah.
You know that it's out there. It's certainly nowhere near as evolved as religion has been.
But growing, like I mean,
But
atheist
growing
groups are
quickly,
like it's awesome to see.
Yeah.
It's awesome to see how community is developing over the whole spectrum.
Yeah,
of belief.
that's all. It's kind of an interesting sociological observation to watch it happen too. Okay.
I don't know if I miss anything. I do think about death quite differently now, of course. I guess I did take comfort in believing in an afterlife before that. Now I know that when I die, it's over. But in another way, I'm so grateful to be present in my life, that I'm living my life, and I want to be present for it now in a way that it makes up for me. It makes up for that belief that I'm gonna have an afterlife, because before I was so dissociated from this life that I wasn't living my life. I was just waiting to die, and would pray and ask Jesus to come and return, because I was not of this world, and I didn't belong here, and so I was just waiting for heaven, where I would be at peace. But
Interesting.
now I feel like, even though this is it, well, if this is it, then I want to live my life every day and be present. So
It's
quite a
interesting.
difference.
Good point. Johnathan, you get the final story here.
I miss the self-confidence I had when I was an atheist. That it was, call it bravado, call it completely unearned, but I had such a sense of self-worth and assurance that came from nowhere else other than that belief that, okay, this is all we've got, this is me. And I'm not sure, because of how the other events in my life have tied in with it, I can't really see where my faith begins and where the fact that, I'm missing a leg. Like that those experiences are indelibly tied into each other forever. It's hard for me to figure out where my tumble from grace started and where my discovery of faith began.
Yeah.
But I miss that, and maybe that's just being in your 20s. But I miss that feeling of self-assurance and invincibility. I mean, the great thing about what I've got now is I'm never alone. And I do find strength in prayer, and I do find strength in the weird and wonderful people I've met through church. But I feel I tend to feel that sense of self-assuredness tends to go away when I'm by myself and I get lost in my own head a little bit.
Interesting. I'm going to have to think about that. That's an interesting statement. Well, I want to thank everybody. This panel has been a little different. It's been a very personal panel, and I want to thank everybody up here for being willing to tell their stories. I purposely tried to avoid getting into challenging people and just bringing out the stories and the personalities and the reactions. So thank you very much. If we could give everybody a hand, I think this was a good group of people, and I appreciate you all, and good luck. We're going to take a break and then come back with some audience Q&A.